Well, it has been a long time coming, but some more power is on tap. Decided that we're going to use the nitrous kit to get some better air intake temps and also a little bit of power. So we'll see how it works. That's going to be the spot for the bottle. We'll have our blow down tube come out and go straight out through the through the trunk, so it'll go out to the bottom of the car, and then we'll have our nitrous line come up this way and connect right to the bottom of there. Should be a pretty slick setup. So this is just going to be a quick and dirty install. There's not going to be any frills, and this is all going to be controlled by my ECU. So I'm not going to have a purge on it because I'm not spraying hundreds of horsepowers with a shot, and maybe at some point in the future I'll have a purge valve, or I'll have a purge solenoid on it. But for now, all we're going to do is have our nitrous bottle there. We'll run all of our line here, and we'll have our nitrous solenoid here, and then we'll run up to our nozzle, which will be somewhere in this vicinity here. So we'll end up drilling a small hole here in the intake. We're going to spray a dry shot ahead of the supercharger, and the ECU will add the extra fuel to it. It'll be a pretty cool system. So there'll be a input to ECU that tells it when the solenoid is actually active. So it'll know when it's spraying nitrous, and then it will switch to a different table. It'll pull some timing and add some fuel. It'll be a pretty cool setup. So let's get to it. First things first is we're going to install the bottle here. So I'm going to cut away a little bit of the carpet so that I can so when I do have to pull the carpet up, it's not stuck underneath it. So I'm going to make a couple of relief cuts here and here, so the carpet will kind of go over this, and you'll see it'll be pretty slick. So I'm going to cut the carpet. I'm going to get the mounts down and test it, make sure I'll be able to get the nitrous bottle out when I need to, and then we'll get some holes drilled for the blowdown tube. We'll get a hole drilled for the actual nitrous, the nitrous line, and then we'll get everything all secured. Well, the nitrous is in, so I ended up getting a blowdown tube. I changed out the burst disc and the fitting here so that I could get a blowdown tube on, just in case it ends up ever having issues. It will actually blow down outside the car. So I ended up drilling a small hole, you can see right there, for the nitrous blowdown. And also here's the supply. So that ended up pretty cool. So that ended up pretty cool because it ran all the way from the front of the car back here and under here. You can see here's my nitrous line there. Take this out. So what I ended up doing was pretty slick. I ended up with in my spare tire well. So you can see right here, I just drilled a hole through the spare tire well, and then the line comes up right along with the fuel lines underneath, and then ties right up into here. So that was a pretty easy deal. Ended up being a pretty clean install. The carpet I cut around these mounts so it looks pretty good. And then we'll take a look underneath so you can see what that looks like. It was pretty easy. So from underneath the car, you can see here's the spare tire well. You can see here's the line that goes into the spare tire well. So that's the nitrous line. These are the fuel lines. And then you can see right here, there's the nitrous line. So we just follow it all the way up. And then when you go forward, you can see right down over there along the pretty much the frame rail all the way down is where the nitrous line goes. And I ended up using, you can see that up in there. So these guys here are just a rubber lined clamp. And I got those at Ace Hardware. They're cheap and easy to find, so I got those rubber lined clamps to keep everything from hopefully vibrating and causing too much of an issue. So, of course, the one of the last pieces of the puzzle is going to be actually getting the Nitrous Jet put in. So this right here is for the Nitrous Jet, and I've got to drill the hole in my intake tube. I'm waiting on the correct line for that, but I've got this right here. This is for my pressure gauge, and I ended up, rather than just having a mechanical gauge, I decided it was only like $130 for the pressure gauge here. So this is the pressure sending unit, and then this will go out to the gauge that'll have in my car to monitor the bottle pressure. And this fitting was just a -4AN to -4AN with a 1/8 inch NPT fitting for my pressure gauge. So that'll be pretty slick, and I'll wire up my solenoid, get it going, and we'll be pretty much done. The other thing I'm going to do is fab a little mounting plate for these for the solenoid. So I've had a hard time finding ones for the power shots. I've just got some scrap stuff laying around I'm going to make one out of, but yeah, so I'll make a little mounting plate here so it'll mount on the bottom, and then it will, more than likely, it'll mount it right about like this just to keep it from rubbing and keep it off of things. So that'll be one of the last things that I do. I was actually going to do that today, just fab a plate, little self tapper here to hold it in, and then have the bottom of it attached there, so just to keep it from flopping around and wearing through stuff. So now that I've got my Nitrous Jet mounted in here, I made sure that the opening faces that way where it's going to be going into the intake. I've got everything snugged down, all the lines. We're going to talk about wiring up this nitrous system. So this is a very easy system. Mine's a dry kit, but even if you have a wet kit, this applies. Wiring up your nitrous solenoids and making it work is not a challenging thing. So we're going to talk about it. I prefer to use relays to control things. I just would hate for this to go bad, and then it's going to be on the controller side of things, so if it gets hot and blows a fuse or something, it could potentially hurt my controller, and I don't want that. So this is going to be in line with the battery, and when the relay closes, then it's going to arm that solenoid. That way, if there is anything that goes funky with the solenoid, gets stuck or whatever, it'll blow a fuse and it won't hurt anything on the controller side. So we're going to talk about that. So to start off with, I've got one of the leads off my solenoid. It goes directly to ground here. And then the other one is going to go to power. So let's talk about the relays and how we're going to do that. I'm actually going to have my fuse in line with my solenoid. So we're going to connect this little fuse block, and this is just a cheap 5 amp fuse block that I got at one of the parts stores. We're going to wire this in line, so this will go here, and then it'll go directly to my relay, which we mounted right here. Here's my relay, and I've just got a fairly standard relay. It's a 20/30 amps, and it's a 12 volt relay. And on the side of it here is how to wire up a relay, and if you don't know how a relay works, I've got a video that explains that. I'll try to link it up here in the corner for you. But basically there's a coil, and a coil is a positive and a negative side, and when that gets pulled in, it will in turn transfer the power from your common terminal over to the normally open terminal. So it'll go from 30 to 87. You can also have it to where it breaks that, so if you go 30 to 87A is your your normally closed side, and then when the relay pulls in, it would break that. We're going to go the other way. So when we energize this coil, we want 30 and 87 to make contact. So we're going to wire it that way. So here's our relay. And what I'm going to do, this is my fuse side. So that we're going to connect him directly to not the common side on our relay, but it'll go to 87. So this is the load. So 87 is going to be our terminal up here. And then the other side of this is going to go to the solenoid. So that will connect to the solenoid wire. So we'll have a fuse in between. And then on the 30 side, that's going to go directly to our battery. So that way we don't have any weird issues. So we'll go right off to the battery on 30. And then on the battery side, we're actually going to have an arming switch, and that's the switch that's going to give power to the battery side. And we're actually going to jumper 30 and 86 together. So that's going to be our positive side of the coil, but also our battery power. So we'll have a switch that turns that on inside the car. There we go. So that's going to come from our arming switch inside the car, and then again on a relay we'll go to 30, and then it doesn't matter which side of the coil is positive and negative as long as you get one of them. So 30 is going to be our battery, or our line side, and then the other, so this one's 85, this one's 86, we'll do 86 as our positive side of the coil. So there we go. So that's going to be coming from inside the car from our arming switch, and then 85 is actually going to be our trigger from our controller. So my controller is my ECU in this case, and the ECU is what gives a negative ground signal to trigger this relay. So the ECU says, hey, whatever parameters we set, mine is RPM and throttle, so as long as we're above 3,500 RPM and at wide open throttle, then it will go ahead and activate this relay. Otherwise it will not activate. Back on the car, you can see that we've got our butt splice here, and then this will go to our positive side of the solenoid, and this is the yellow wire is going to go inside the car for our activation, and the only thing we're missing is our ground, so we're going to have to grab that too. And I'm probably going to throw the relay just right up here in this corner so it's nice and close to all of the parts. And then I'll throw a self-tapping screw in there just to hold it in place, and that way if I ever need to get to it, it's quick and easy, and it's still kind of tucked out of the way in here. I could put it up here, but that's a little bit more visible. I don't really like that. We're going to go right down in there. So we'll get that screwed in place, and then I've got to get a ground wire. We'll get that on. Here's our relay. So that's mounted. And then I'm going to go ahead and connect the positive side here. There's a lot of people that hate on butt splices, but I don't. A lot of people say that soldering the connections is the only way to go. You know, if my race car was seeing water all the time or on the roads regularly, I'd say probably, but good enough for me. So now if I ever do have any issues, my fuse will be right here. It'll be accessible. It'll be right where I can get to it, but also I can tuck things kind of out of the way so it's not sticking up, looking terrible. So that's how we're going to be. We'll have our fuse right down in there, and then this is, again, our positive wire. And then this is my pressure sensor for the nitrous system. So we're going to feed this stuff into the car all at once so that it's not trying to fish a whole bunch of separate wires. So we'll poke this through there. There's a grommet right in here that I've already got some access through. I only have some yellow primary wire, so since I don't have any black, I'm just going to use 2 different pieces of yellow, and then I'm going to identify each side. And I do know that the ground, so the ground just goes right inside here to the ECU, so I don't need a ton, you can see. And then, so that we can identify this, I'm going to put a little bit of black tape on both ends to signify that this is my ground. So there we go. There's a little bit of black tape on that end. Take the same on this end here. We'll throw a little bit of tape on there so that we know when we pull it through that's the black one. Also, we're going to know because it's a lot shorter, so. There we go. That'll get plugged onto our ground terminal on the relay. Voila. And just to make it easier to push through that grommet, I'm going to tape these ends here. So now there's a couple of grommets right there. I'm going to shove the wires through and then we will pull them into the cab. So I've got these wires shoved through the grommet down in here. You can see I already grabbed the wires here. But grab onto them, pull them through the grommet the rest of the way. And then after this, we'll be routing the wires inside the car. So we'll have our ground that goes into the kick panel here for the ECU. And then I haven't decided yet, where I want my arming switch to be for the Nitrous Jet. So that's the next step. Now that I've got all of the wiring done in here, it is time for me to take the dash off. I've got a switch that I've got to install, and then I'm going to wire it up. That's what the yellow power wire is for. I've also got a gauge that I'm going to install right over here for my nitrous pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and take the dash apart, and then we'll get started on that. Got the cluster out. Now I've got to drill my other hole and get my switch positioned in there too. So I'm thinking this is pretty much the only space that I've got left. It's going to be right here with our nitrous pressure. And probably, I don't know, either below it or on top of it for the switch. So these are my thoughts. Let's go get some holes drilled. I'm going to use a hole saw that's just a tad. This is about a 2-inch hole saw. It's just a tad. You can see it's pretty much about the same size as my gauge here. So I'm going to use, that's 2 1/8, so that'll be perfect. I'll use that. So I set it on here, drew myself a center mark. So there's my pilot hole. Now it's time to drill the big hole. There we go. There, the gauge fits good. I'm going to clean up the hole a little bit from any of the burrs, and then we'll get it mounted. Go from there. Oh, the other thing that I got to do before I get this back in the car is get my nitrous switch mounted too. And I'm thinking that right below here, I think this is a good spot. There's nothing behind there in the dash, so I think that'll be a good spot for it. Yeah, so I chose to go with your typical nitrous switch here. So I'm going to have this guy mounted right about like that. Nitrous on, off. Perfect. Finally able to get my gauge bezel here squared away. The arming switch is here, and there's my pressure gauge. I had to do a little trimming in my dash because it's pretty close on this side over here, so that took a little bit of time, but otherwise not a big deal. I did also notice that my gauge didn't come with the power wire to power it up, so I used glow shift gauges. Must have just been something that didn't come in the kit, but I'm going to use the power wire from the oil pressure gauge right next to it to power it up in the meantime. The other thing I already did is I got the wires for. There's my arming wire for the relay, and then this is the sensor wire for the nitrous pressure gauge. So I got those ran over to this side here. I just have to get them up into the dash area, which is not a big deal. There we go. So what's going to happen here, I already had a 12 volt wire on the back of my gauge cluster that was an auxiliary one. It's that yellow one there. So we're in the power side to it, over to the switch, and then the other side of that switch will get connected to here. So that's only the 12 volts, the positive to the relay coil, and then the negative side comes from my ECU, and I've got to set that up still, so that will be what triggers the actual relay, and then when the relay triggers, then the solenoid will come on. So I'm going to get this wired up, and then we will test it out. A little labeler here, and I like to label all the ends of my wires so I know what's what next time I get into it. So it's really important, especially if you're using some of the same color wire-to-wire stuff, that you label it somehow or mark it. You can see all mine have these little labels on there. That one's ground. This one's my labels back here. It's my 12 volts. Switch to 12 volts. I've got the dash back in, and it's time to test the gauges, make sure everything's working. There we go. That's a good sign. Now remember, this is my oil pressure gauge, and my new nitrous one didn't come with power hookup, so I robbed it from the oil pressure just for testing purposes. So I can see my pressure it's at least, the gauge is on and reading 0, and it is 0 right now, so that's good. We've got our arming switch. Test some of the other ones, make sure they're still working. So there's our line lock. There's our flat shift. There we go. And the other thing that I want to do differently with my flat shift is, in one of my previous videos I installed an actual clutch switch, because the one that is on this is a normally closed one, so it opens, and it's a little tricky for wiring, so I put a normally open clutch switch on there, so when the arm is in all the way, it closes. So I'm going to use that for my flat shift, so I'm going to put that in the middle. And then my flat shift will only be active when I've got my clutch all the way to the floor, and when the switch is on.
A few days later, after getting my butt kicked at work for a few days, and we pick up where I left off the other night. So we've got the switch installed, we've got the gauge installed, we've tested operation on both. Now we've got to get the wiring for the activation installed. So this is going to be what triggers the relay to fire the solenoid, and this is going to come from my ECU.
We're going to do the last piece of the puzzle is to find our output wire, and on my particular ECU I already know that it's output 55. Alright, so this blue wire here is the one that I used as my output for that. So we're going to take our yellow wire, connect it to that. We'll just cut it, trim it, splice it. There we go. So that's our ground output from the ECU. We are connected to that now. Now it's time to connect to the ECU and then configure that output so that it only comes on under wide open throttle and above a certain RPM. So let's go ahead and cut to that. So now it's time to fire up Tuner Studios, and for those of you that don't know, I am running an ECU from Stinger Performance. It's basically a Mega Squirt, and it uses Tuner Studio software to run. We'll open up our last project. There we go, we are connected. So we are going to go up to our CAN bus options and go to output test mode. So we're right up here to our CAN bus options, output test mode. So this is where we're going to actually test the output.
So if you enable test mode, then you can tell it to run. The other thing that we're going to do is go to our boost and advanced settings, and under there is our programmable on-off outputs. So ALED, that is our on-off output that we are going to be using. So there are two different things that we're going to use. You can use two different conditions. So for ours, we're going to use throttle position, and we're also going to use RPM. So we don't want that to come on unless we are above, we go 99 on our throttle position, and that's just to account for any inaccuracies on our sensor. And then when our RPM is greater than 4,000. And then the hysteresis is when it's going to turn off, so it'll have to go to 3,900 to turn off, and the throttle position will have to go to 98.5 because we've got a 0.5 hysteresis. So those are our output conditions. We'll hit burn on that, and we know that that is set to the ECU. So it's always a good rule of thumb. You want to make sure that you spray your nitrous when your throttle position is wide open, right here, and then also when your RPM is greater than about 4,000. If you spray it too low, you can get nitrous pooling in the intake, and you can end up with nitrous backfires that blow stuff up. So good rule of thumb. So we're going to close that now, and now we're going to test our output. So we are on ALED, so we're going to enable test mode, and then right here, all we're going to do is turn it on and off. So here's on. So we're going to go to our ALED right here, and we're going to hit on. And I have a light on my dash that actually tells me when that output is on. You can see that red light right there. We'll turn it off again. And then we'll turn it on. So that's how I know when it's active. And then what we're going to do is hit our arming switch. And you can hear that solenoid snapping. Awesome. So let's try it again. So now we've got our arming switch on. You can see our LED is on. And then within the ECU, we've got our ALED. So we'll turn it off again. There you go. On. Off. On. Off. On. There you go. So that's working really good. So we've got that output set up for our nitrous to fire. Well, that's going to be it for this video. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. If you guys don't already, follow me on Instagram. I am at Fred_40, Fred Stang 408. Fred_Stang 408. Thanks for following me along with this. Next step, now we've got the nitrous wired, we've got it set up, now we've got to fill our nitrous bottle, and we have to do a little bit of tuning and adjustment on Tuner Studios here. So the next step is going to be to get everything set up in Tuner Studios so that we're pulling the right amount of timing and giving it the right amount of fuel. So stay tuned for that next video. I'm going to try to get the nitrous bottle filled this weekend, and we'll see when I can get the rest of it tuned. I'm going to try to do some pulls on a dyno to see how much power I'm gaining, but also I'll data log. I'll make sure that my air intake temps are dropping like I want them to. That's kind of the main purpose of this. Drop the air intake temps, get a little bit more boost out of it and a little bit more power. So next is going to be the testing of that. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have a good one. If you've got any questions or comments, throw them below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Have a good one.